Hello and welcome to the second episode of the EU Bubble Insider, a podcast that is part of a bi-weekly newsletter. A newsletter that brings you the most up-to-date insight, case studies, also access to a calendar with recommended events. All that you need to know if you are and want to be a more and better informed EU Bubble Insider. And now let's get into this week's interview. So I'm very happy to welcome our today's guest, Anna Gumbau, EU climate and energy journalist, event moderator, and also podcaster. Anna, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here with us.
Great being here. Thanks so much for having me.
Anna, you've been active as a journalist, editor, and also event moderator in the Brussels bubble for many years now. I'm quite sure that many of our listeners will recognize you from the debates they've been watching, especially those in the last 2 years during the pandemic, 3 years. I wanted to start with this opening question. What was it that actually brought you to journalism, and how your career started? I think it's a nice way to start our conversation. If you could share a bit of your story, and especially what brought you to report on climate and European energy topics.
Right. So I think I wanted to be a journalist from a very young age. I think I was maybe 10 years old when I told my parents for the first time, look, Mom, Dad, I want to be a journalist. I think I always enjoyed writing. I enjoyed public speaking. I was the kind of person that always asked a lot of questions. So it just felt that the craft itself was something that was just a match made in heaven, really. And I think from a very young age, I was very excited about all these stories of, reporters traveling the world and catching stories and scoops and really witnessing history in front of them. Probably what often comes as a surprise is the fact that when I started, I wanted to be a sports journalist. I grew up watching football. I'm originally from Barcelona, so of course, being a big time Barca fan, loved Formula One, loved motorsports. So I always thought that it would be something very interesting for me to do, and a way to kind of break into this field was through journalism. Somehow, as time passed and I was getting closer to making this life-changing decision, should I study journalism or not, I somehow also started growing more interested in politics. And I remember a high school trip in Strasbourg. I was 17 years old back then, that actually the press responsible from one of the press officers from the European Parliament welcomed us there and told us what it was like to work with journalists in the EU institutions. And that's probably the first time where I was like, wow, this sounds exciting. And I was very, pro-European from a very young age. I was born a few years after Spain joined the EU, so I could, I was the first generation that reaped all the benefits from that from the very beginning. And as I traveled, I started getting more and more interested in the Central and Eastern European region and everything related to Eastern Europe, also Russia at that time. And I started getting more and more interested as I studied university and so on in EU, Eastern European relations. So, for instance, I did a seminar on international journalism the year of the Euromaidan. So actually, one of my big project at that seminar was to follow the Euromaidan protest as if I were there, but from home. And that's something that really marked me. And then the thing is that energy plays such a vital role in EU Eastern Partnership relations, but it always felt very technical. It was always a bit scared of touching up on those topics. So I kind of like neglected that part until I actually had the chance to, when I came back to Barcelona for my master's degree, to do an internship at a think tank. And it was to research on energy and climate. And that's really, I had the chance to do that internship. I had, their in-house experts helping me to understand the topic, even when I was I had absolutely no idea about energy. I only thought, coal is bad, gas is probably bad, renewables are good, nuclear is tricky. That was my, my mental framework at the time. But I learned so much from there, and I got so interested in this subject that I thought, I need to find a specialization, and probably this one is it, because it's going to be the big topic for the next years. And it's been 5 years now, so...
Would you agree that when you write about energy, when you report about energy and climate, you actually get to also write about many other topics, like healthcare, like tourism, like maybe even sports, because energy influences all other areas of people's life.
I think that's probably what makes this entire area so interesting, that it's so many aspects that are intertwined in it. I mean, of course, public health is a vital issue related to air pollution. Then, of course, there's everything related to trade, to geopolitics. There's a lot of law and regulation involved. There's a whole economics of energy. There's, of course, everything related to means of transport and transportation. And I mean, of course, then like motorsports, Formula One and all that is probably the most obvious case. But we're also seeing lately all these cases about, football players and football teams being demanded that they take trains more instead of taking a 20-minute flight to go from one city to the other for their national leagues. This kind of matter, it's become so entrenched, I think, in our daily lives, and it's an area where you're constantly learning. I mean, it's really this like never-ending circle of technological developments. Of course, there's a technology and digitalization segment into it. There's another area there. So yeah. I mean, if you want to be constantly challenged, I always recommend get into energy. It's
so those 5 years working in the Brussels bubble, they were not like any other 5 years you could pick from a previous time, because part of that was the pandemic. Also now we're facing the energy crisis, which dominates debates and reporting. Could you maybe share some most memorable moments from the last 2, 3, or even 5 years? And I'm especially asking about moments that maybe have shaped the way you think about your role as a journalist or debate moderator in this process of policy debate and politics debate.
I think getting to report on these topics in the age of the pandemic was a big learning experience for me. I mean, actually, for my career as an energy journalist started in London. I was working in a private kind of intel surveys, providing reports and analysis on mainly on gas back then. That was the time where there was this switch towards the European Green Deal when the von der Leyen Commission just took office. So it was a very exciting time to be following that. And I moved back to Brussels because I was there before my master's degree. It's a very long story, but anyway, I came back to Brussels in February 2020, mid-February 2020. So, I mean, it was a very exciting period because the European climate law was meant to be presented soon and so on. But then I remember spending my first weeks in Brussels, trying to get all my stuff together, really, finding an apartment, finding, getting registered, all these bureaucratic matters. So I couldn't make that much time for, building sources, for instance. The thing is that by the time I was ready to start, taking people out for coffees and this kind of stuff, then the lockdown broke out. And of course, it meant that all this process, which I mean, you know it perfectly well, that is so crucial for a journalist to build a trust, to build a network of contacts, to really make connections in that sector. I had to make it online because
and it doesn't work the same way.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I think I kind of managed to get around that. I mean, I had to be very practical. I had to be very practical in saying, okay, I don't have this possibility to get to meet people in conferences and speak on the sidelines and so on. So what do? I started looking for alumni in my universities that worked in energy and climate. I started looking actually even for people in my former student organization who are now in the EU energy or climate sector. So it really, I think especially this past couple of years, it made me become, I guess, much more of a problem solver and trying to be like very practical to really make the most of the tools that we had at our disposal back then. So
that's actually interesting what you said, that by looking for ways to connect with people in a more meaningful way, you search for connections that you know from the real life that could get you there to establish sort of a more personal connection than you would just by jumping on a Zoom call with a person you never met before. I think that's a very good way to actually approach it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the Zoom coffees were still there, but given that at that time it was impossible, to exchange business cards at events and this kind of stuff, which now it's become so much easier, again, from this point of view to connect with people and have a conversation with them. So it was awkward, and it was also a lot of, trying to build trust by seeing me as or at least pretending to be a knowledgeable person. So I had to put my work out there on social media from a very early start so that people would notice me and see like, okay, like this girl kind of knows what she's talking about, which always makes a better impression when you're getting started. If they don't necessarily know you or haven't met you before, but they know that you can also bring some value to them and ask as meaningful questions as possible.
And I thought, well, the pandemic, when it started, one thought I had, it's going to bring us to this habit of doing things remotely, using digital tools more efficiently, because there's been a lot of discussion that this is the future. Mm-hmm. I always been an advocate of working remotely, of a result based work environment, but I think that what it actually did, it showed us that the grass is not always greener on the other side, mm-hmm. and switching to a fully remote life, it's not something we should aim for, mm-hmm. because it just takes so much of the value of the personal connections away, which mm-hmm. in a work of a journalist, as you say, is very important. But not only mm-hmm. in that work, in any line of work.
Absolutely. And for instance, now that something that I'm seeing in events lately, I mean, I think it's a very interesting moment. And people ask me, do you think that now everybody wants to go, digital or hybrid, or are people like craving in-person events again? And I see on the one hand that there's more and more in-person events again in Brussels, and usually normally very good turnout if the events are good and the speakers are good and the topic is interesting and timely. But also what I see a lot is that if you give, the audience the chance, if they're especially very long events, I don't know, like a day-long event with several panel discussions and so on and so forth, and you give them the chance to follow remotely, I think in a lot of cases, if people are just interested in one specific panel discussion or something like that, they're probably just listening online. Like, people won't really be bothered to be joining in person unless you give them very clear incentives to join them in person. So if there's, I don't know, so networking reception afterwards, I mean, That's one of the reasons why a lot of people go to events as well. That's understandable, or they want to get to speak to someone very, very specific. So unless you don't give them some incentives to attend in-person events, actually a lot of people, I get the feeling that they seem to enjoy the comfort of, just tuning in online and listen passively, I don't know, as they do other work or answer emails and this kind of matters. So there's not a clear answer to that.
Absolutely. And I think that the next months and years will also show us switch back to more to the traditional ways of debating, but maybe with some additional new tools that just give some advantages, but don't necessarily cancel the entire in-person experience. So when you, well, I think that some of our listeners may be looking to follow a career like yours of a debate moderator. And if we have listeners like that, I wanted to ask you, how do you actually become a preferred, a known and recognized debate moderator, which you are? I've seen you in so many really interesting and important events, and I think that you're one of the most engaging debate moderators Brussels have, and I just wanted to say that.
Thank you.
And I'm so happy to have you here because of your experience. Yeah, that's the question. What actually how do you become great at what you do?
First of all, thanks a lot for the kind comment. I mean, that's really nice to hear. So thanks a lot for that. It's an interesting question because I was somehow when I went freelance. It's now about a year and a half ago, a bit more than a year ago. I wasn't expecting that, moderating or hosting events would become my near full-time job. For me, it was something that I thought it would be doing more on the side while I focused on my writing and journalism. So I've improvised a lot on the past journey, and somehow it just led me into this direction.
So you didn't follow a framework. You didn't read a book.
Not really.
This is how you do it.
No, I mean, I know that was something that I really enjoyed doing. So I started taking up practically any chance that got in my way. I just honestly, frankly, wasn't expecting that, I would have to schedule like all my personal engagements or trips, or like even my journalistic deadlines around events so frequently. I wasn't expecting that this would be kind of the main bulk of my work. It's something I started doing. Coming back to your question, this is something I started doing when I was part of my student organization. I just thought that, again, like since I was a kid, I enjoyed, public speaking a lot. I'm a very curious person. I'm just like bringing, like all my, like the energy there and so on. So that's something that I started doing as a volunteer, and I enjoyed it. And one day I found out that there were a bunch of people in the Brussels circles and also in other cities that were doing that professionally. I was like, okay, that sounds like an interesting way to be working, and like an interesting option to keep in mind. And then little by little, it's the kind of things that you learn a lot as you do it. I mean, if I would start, watching myself on videos from a year and a half ago, like I wouldn't recognize myself. Or I think I've learned a lot as I continued from from something as simple as modulating a bit my speed. I'm Mediterranean, so I'm a fast speaker, and sometimes I got the feedback like, "Hey, you speak very fast. Can you slow down?" So I learned to adjust the tempo. That's why having external feedback and also watching yourself, which is dreadful, helps a lot. And also learning from other moderators, really. I mean, there's a whole lot of people here in Brussels who have been doing this for years, and the best way to see, how are they transitioning from one panel to the other? How are they introducing speakers? How are they introducing interactions with the audience? Like, these are some inspirations that I also get from watching other people doing that.
So what would you say are the principles that you follow in every debate you do these days?
Mm-hmm. So I guess obviously the previous preparation is crucial. I mean, I don't think a moderator needs to be an expert on the subject matter, but having some knowledge always helps. I mean, I'm normally called for events in the energy and climate field. So from this point of view, I probably have a certain advantage, or I don't have to, perhaps in some topics more than others, I will need to prepare more or will need to prepare less. But I mean, of course, like having some background knowledge to be able to ask the meaningful questions and really what's at stake and being able to connect the dots, that's crucial. It's always good to have also some approach to with the speakers beforehand. I always try to at least send them a message beforehand. Often having, this kind of prep calls with them to get to know what is it that you want to talk about, what's your main message. This is how the structure is going to look like. I think this is especially helpful for those speakers who might not be used to this kind of matter. So from this point of view, I like to make a lot of attention to that, and also so that they trust me and they feel more at ease during the discussion. And then I think what's very important, and probably I should have started with that because that's really the key, is to keep the audience at the heart of it, to understand, what your audience is, what the audience expects to get or should expect to get from this discussion. What's their level of knowledge on this subject matter? Based on that, you will have to readjust the questions or not. What are their views on that? Giving them the room for interaction. I think that's very important to really make. For me, I guess I summarized it as making the experience as enjoyable as possible. And I mean, at the end of the day, we're talking about business conference. There's only so much enjoyment that you can get out of them, but as much as possible, try to make it an enjoyable experience for for the audience, and also for the speakers as well. I think this is how I would my approach summarized in really one sentence.
Thank you for that, Anna. And I would like to stay for one more question in the debates on the debates topic. You have been a long time advocate of gender equality. And you would imagine that in a year that we are now, 2022, 2023, in times like this, everyone should know that it's just not okay to organize debates where there's only men sitting on the podium, and yet we still have them. You take part in discussing plans for debates. I assume that you refuse taking part in moderating debates where there are only men present. And I wanted to ask you of your, personal experience in this field, and also if you have any ideas how to address the challenges that we face in this space.
Right. So thanks a lot for this question, because I think it's a very important one to address. I mean, I think, I guess from a very young age, this is something that has mattered a lot to me. As I said, I wanted to start in the field of journalism as a sports reporter, which, I mean, it's obviously a very male-dominated sector, probably much more than energy. But then I went from one male-dominated sector to another one, which the energy sector still is. There's many, issues while this still happens. I mean, of course, there's something that comes from, the very young, like, educational background, which is that girls from a very young age are discouraged to like science and technology subjects. And then, like, once you are a professional woman and you reach, a certain status, it's harder to get promoted and then conceal, like everything around work-life balance. For instance, I'm not a mother myself, so I mean, there's only so much that I know from speaking to women who have struggled with getting the flexibility they need. So I cannot really go that. I don't want to go that much into detail with that. But despite of that, I think it's impressive to see the amount of how many brilliant women are there in the energy, climate, and sustainability sectors, and that's what shocks me. It shocks me so much to see that there are still so many all male panel discussions. Normally, when someone asks me to moderate an event, I send my quotation and my offer, and I always add that I do not moderate all male panels, unless it's proven that there's been a significant effort into bringing female experts, simply because I don't want to be the token woman. I mean, it happens to me very frequently that sometimes I cannot do an event, and then people ask me for recommendations, and they are very specific in saying that we would like to have a female moderator. Red flag. That's the red flag that I always have to look for. It cannot always happen because there are some sectors that it's really like 90% of it. If you go especially into very niche, like energy, like emerging energies and this kind of stuff, there's only so much. That's the way it is, no? But other than that, I think there are so many options around that, and so many ways that you can get around that. I mean, for starters, in Brussels, there is the Brussels Binder, which is this platform where female experts register there with their profiles. And if you look for, I don't know, I want an expert on circular economy, you get like all this database of brilliant women working on this sector. So this is one option, which is not so much. It's more and more known, but especially in some sectors, sometimes I ask them, hey, do you know that? And I just send them the link, and they're like, oh wow, that's a great source, thank you. So that's it. Sometimes I get some comments saying like, yeah, we really tried to look for we wanted to bring like our female expert, but like she didn't feel that she was qualified to do that. Then it's like, okay, like, first of all, there's a question of really insisting that we know that you can talk about these matters, and it would be really great to have you. And I think that's partly also precisely why it matters so much to have more female experts in the public debate, simply because as soon as like one puts herself in the spotlight, it's very likely that many other women will feel encouraged to do that. For me, it's not so much about changing the women, which is sometimes the answer that is given to the bringing more inclusion into male-dominated sectors, but it's more about changing the structures, and so yes, sometimes the matter is not so much about changing women and like getting them to be more assertive and be louder, but really it's more changing the structures and putting the necessary structures in place so that women feel more comfortable speaking up in still wildly male-dominated sectors.
And also, from my experience speaking with our clients for whom we organize debates, there's a lot of understanding of the matter. So it's not something that happens often, but sometimes I see that there is not enough understanding of the importance of it. And then I just try to use one argument and listen, if we do that, we're going to have people commenting that this is not okay. And if you want to have comments pointing out that there should be at least one woman in the panel, then sure, let's do it. But it's just, it's a risk. It's an image risk for the organizer of the debate. And it doesn't cost much to avoid it. Just, being a bit more flexible and open-minded. And I think that,
I think we're seeing more and more scrutiny over that, because it just stands out. You see a picture, four men in suits speaking with each other. And for instance, in my case specifically, I normally talk about the subjects such as energy and climate, which there are so many proven ways in which it's clear that these matters affect different genders differently. So this is why it's so important to have a not only women speakers, but also gendered dimension on those. Sometimes it's difficult for certain clients to understand why it matters so much. But again, it's a subconscious bias. When people tell me sometimes that we go for expertise and not gender, it's like, there's actually many proven ways in which, it's also the same in hiring processes. If you have the same CV of a man and of a woman, there's many cases still this unconscious bias of picking the man's CV over a woman's CV, especially if it's a man picking it. There's this book, Invisible Women by Caroline Criado, that I would wholeheartedly recommend, which addresses that in detail. And with panel discussions, I get the feeling that it still happens the same.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And I would like to change the topic now. We addressed this a bit when we spoke about doing your networking in the times of the pandemic, but I want you to elaborate a bit more on the technicalities and your approach to sourcing information. So when you work on articles, where do you get information from, apart from Google and maybe ChatGPT or whatever tool you would, or other media? But how do you search for sources? How do you build relationship with sources? If you could share a bit on how that works best for you, what works best for you?
Right. Well, in a lot of cases, when I write articles and features, I normally, since I work especially for energy industry publications, this means that I'm a specialized reporter, and that I'm also, my audience is specialized. So after some years in the field, you start to identify who the key players are. So for circular economy, there's a certain amount of organizations and a certain organizations that work on this topic, and that are a no-brainer for me to reach out to. If I'd be working on hydrogen, there are certain players I would be speaking with. So I think by that, as the longer you stay in this field, the more you're able to identify what the ecosystem looks like really, and what the different organizations are, and what they do, and what their positions are. Then for me, I think, as I said, I started building my network of sources in the midst of the pandemic, and reaching out via emails and scheduling either Zoom coffees or old school calls. With the first commission source I spoke to, we would just had a 20-30 minute phone call. It was really nice, but of course it lacked the personal touch. And for me, the important, I guess the most important issue for me is to be able to generate trust. Simply because, these people have such a limited amount of time that you need to prove them that, hey, it's worth speaking with me. I'm able to follow the conversation at your level. I'm genuinely interested in what you do and what your views are. So, something that I used to do a lot, or I don't do it so much anymore, but especially when I was doing more of the breaking news and, day-to-day journalism, I always shared my articles on Twitter, the main takeaways of each one of the articles on Twitter, what made me think, what are the key issues at stake, and doing, wider analysis into why this specific piece of news matters so much, putting, breaking news, a story into the wider context too. And I guess this helped me to build my profile, at least come across as an expert. I'm not saying to really be an expert or not, but at least, at least fake it until I make it, and come across as that, and generate the trust. So I think this is something that is crucial for me, and this is where, empathy really plays an important role. If you feel that you are pushing a source a bit too far, it's very important to know a little bit, I think, like when to back down, so that this trust is not broken. And really make the personal connections. I mean, now with a few of the people I used to be in touch with exclusively for interviews now are people that I go for coffees or go for dinner with, which have become like closer friends. It's not that everyone in my network of sources needs to become a friend, but at least to be able to talk about, not exclusively about, what they expect on the next trialogue on the Renewable Energy Directive, but also, hey, so how's your day been? How do you enjoy spending your holidays? Is there anything exciting coming up for you? So really, I think making this personal touch. I don't think it's so much it's about networking, but it's mainly, I think, about connecting and indeed, as you put it earlier, to a deeper level. That's something that matters a lot to me.
And I like that you address trust so much, because believe it or not, there are people doing comms in the EU bubble and also anywhere else in the world, in any sector, who are afraid of journalists, who are afraid to contact journalists with their news, their maybe some sensitive information, because there is no trust and they don't know how to build that trust. And I wanted to ask if you would have any hints or any information to people who are not feeling so confident in contacting journalists they don't know, which is something that journalists actually expect, because as a journalist you are always on the lookout for new information. But how would you respond to such fear and lack of trust, and seeing a journalist as someone who is actually trying to examine you rather than become a partner?
That's a very important question, and I don't think I have a clear-cut answer. I mean, I can say, the way I approach it, but it might not necessarily. I mean, it's not an either-or question. I think for me, normally when I'd be speaking to certain organizations, you always get this feeling on, sometimes they are very keen on speaking with you if they have some, like big news and big important news to share. Sometimes they are going to be very reluctant into sharing certain information. And, they're going to, in many cases, make several demands to you. Can we see the article? So sometimes it still happens. Or at least, can we see the quotes beforehand? Sometimes I'm happy to share the quotes beforehand if there's a very specific topic and I know that I may misinterpret something, or I may have misunderstood something, or that there's data that I need to double check. So from this point of view, this is something that at least to me, I don't mind doing it too much, as long as it's simply because, the topic is very nuanced and I want to be sure that I get, the full grasp of it. But then that shouldn't be giving license to, communications professionals or their PR responsibles, whatever, to completely change the quote. For me, it's more simply like, have you said this or not? And like introducing just like, cosmetic changes, really, if at most. But for me, this is a sign to, the most important is, I think, for me to agree beforehand on the terms of the interview. That, this is going to be on record. If there's something that you want to tell me off the record, you can please make it very clear and specify. But, I can welcome that. Reassure them of something as simple that, like this recording, like I'm going to record you, but I'm not going to share it, which, it's usually a no-brainer, but like make that very clear and very explicit. So the terms of the interview, and reassure them about how you're going to proceed next. Like, I always try to be very transparent. I'm also speaking with this, and this other organization, and you should expect the article to come out hopefully next week or whatever. And if you want to send me the quotes beforehand to double check and make sure that I got the gist of what you wanted to say, happy to do so. So really, I think being very clear on, again, what's your modus operandi really.
From the beginning, from the start.
For me. Exactly.
Okay. And we already touched on technology a couple of times in this interview. And I think that journalism is one of those industries that will be affected by new technologies, by AI. But it's still very uncertain in what way. And I wanted to ask if, all those new not any more geeky things, because this is becoming something that gets to be used by the masses. All those new digital technologies, if this is something you use, or are you the more analog type of person? And if yes, then why? Why are you not giving parts of your work maybe to AI or something? Or what's your approach to that?
That's a very good question, because I wouldn't even be able to know myself like how I score or how I can classify myself. Funnily enough, I think when I was a student of journalism or even before that, I used to be quite an early adopter of media. Like I launched my first blog when I was 14 years old, and I was talking about football on it. So from this point of view, when I used to be very interested in how to use technologies for my work, and just to really share my thoughts. And to give you another example, so I launched my Twitter account when I was still in high school. I was 17. That was according to Twitter. I think I got a couple of days ago the alert that it was my 14th anniversary, so it was quite recent anyway. So that's the thing. I mean, some years back, I used to be quite an early adopter on many of those platforms. I don't know why. The more I've grown, the more I've gone a bit back to basics. I mean, I still use Twitter. I still use the at least the social media that millennials normally use. I'm not so much into TikToks and the kinds. But I'm still, for instance, quite analogical in certain ways. I mean, for instance, I still always bring a notebook with me in my interviews, and sometimes I record them, but I still I have this weird habit of taking notes when I do. But something, for instance, that's really helpful is these softwares that are helping me transcribe the interviews afterwards. That's something that I regularly make use of, for instance, Author and whatnot. Now, if we look more into the future, and I mean, I guess it's inevitable if we talk about AI to talk about the ChatGPT, because it's in everyone's mouth right now. It was even in your previous newsletter, which I saw. I think that's very interesting. And I mean, frankly, I think the other day someone asked ChatGPT about why the energy transition in Germany is so complex, and he posted the answer, and I was like, that's strangely accurate. So I think, to an extent, it's going to help in doing the kind of, I guess, I wouldn't necessarily call it the dirty work, but the more kind of, groundwork of context and, probably, again, providing some kind of background. And then looking into the future, there's a chance that the briefer news media pieces are probably going to be automated. I mean, at the end of the day, you just need to insert, the 5 W's: the who, what, where, when, and who, what, where, when, why, and how. And you could probably get a piece of news generated just by that. What I think it's never going to be replacing the work of the report. I mean, I think it's not going to be replacing the work of the reporter, or at least it's going to allow reporters to focus in work, in deeper work. So, for instance, ChatGPT or any other AI source, it's not going to provide you with this commission draft regulation that is still confidential and And artificial intelligence, as far as I know, it's not going to be able to leak you documents from the Commission. If so, the Commission will probably have to rethink their entire cybersecurity infrastructure. They're not going to be able to get scoops. They're not going to be able to get, exclusive interviews with sources and witnesses and this kind of stuff. So I think there's a potential there in getting reporters to be able to, in a way, kind of go back to the roots and, leave the overdose of information, being able to focus on the deeper work and the work that really makes journalism that stands out. So the quality of the sources, the quality of the insight, the deeper investigations and this kind of stuff.
And I think there's also the question, how open will people be to reading news, knowing that it's not written by a human, that it's automatically generated, and how much trust there will be towards news like this. But exactly. I guess time will show. I wanted to finish with a question because, we just entered 2023. So I wanted to finish our conversation with the question about your predictions and expectations. What topics do you think will make this year, will dominate this this year in climate and energy debate?
Well, I think still, of course, as long as Russia's war on Ukraine still goes on, which I hope it's going to be over soon, and I'm wishing for Ukraine's freedom, full freedom and independence. This is going to still affect all the news cycle in so many ways. And I think this is again why the energy is an answer, and the switch to clean energy is the answer to that. So we are still going to see big steps from EU member states and from the EU in general to switch towards clean energy, to diversify supplies and to switch towards clean energy, to accelerate energy savings. So I think that's still going to dominate the agenda because so much has happened in the past few months. The European Commission has been tasked with finding so many answers to the energy crisis. And I think now we are going to start seeing the results of that. Are we going to see record high solar energy and wind energy being deployed and in the planning in Europe? I think it's going to be the case. If we get very technical, probably one of the big topics, or probably not, it is going to be one of the big topics, is everything around the reform of the European electricity market, because this is something that actually pretty much nobody wants to do, but somehow a few member states have pushed for it, and now it's in the agenda, and we'll have to deal with that. So that's going to be a big story, but a very technical one. Mm-hmm. And then I think we're going to see a lot of tensions and a lot of interest from the trade dimension and a bit, the bigger geopolitical issues around that. We're going to be talking more and more about the European response and the global response to the Inflation Reduction Act of the United States and how European clean energy technology can position itself in this context. We're going to be seeing more and more discussions around getting the necessary critical raw materials to also make the energy transition happen. And these issues are all deeply geopolitical. So yeah, I think this is going to be, at least from the energy sector, these are going to be it, really, the acceleration towards clean energy sources, because there's no other option. This is a decade of action until 2030, and again, we're already in 2023, so we really need to accelerate that.
So to wrap it up, this might be a year where a lot things are put into progress, and when we see a lot of progress, and hopefully, as you said, the Russia's war against Ukraine will come to prompt and the suffering
Absolutely.
that it's causing.
Absolutely.
Anna, thank you so much for your time, for all the insights. Thank you everyone for listening. We'll be back with another episode in about 2 weeks. Please follow the EU Bubble Insider and the Molecule Group for regular updates on everything that is important to know when working in the EU bubble, and if you want to become a true insider of the EU bubble. Anna, thank you so much. Have a nice day.
Thanks, Krzysztof. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.